Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to check the video out. Really appreciate that. Guys, today we're going to be talking about why the jig is the #1 bass fishing lure of all time. We do a lot of videos on this channel with jigs and jerkbaits, especially because they're probably two of the top bass fishing producers of all time. But another reason why we do a lot of videos on jigs and jerkbaits is they are the two most complicated lures to fish in terms of learning that there's so many variables that make up jig fishing and jerkbait fishing that it just requires a lot of time on them. I mean, there are hundreds of different possible scenarios and variables when you talk about a specific jig or jerkbait setup. So you can't ever learn too much about them. They are the most complicated lures to fish, but in my opinion, they're the most rewarding lures to fish, especially jig because of the quality fish that the jig catches. So we're going to get into that in today's video. Also, guys, just two quick housekeeping tips before we get started. I just want to remind you about the sale going on right now on my SolarBat RB2 and RB3 series signature glasses from SolarBat. If you get a pair right now, you can get them at 50% off. I'll put the SolarBat link in the description if you guys like to pick up a pair. And also, please check out my Fish the Moment lake map breakdowns that I built for Fish the Moment. These are great resources to learn more about any lake across the country. It gives you some good places to get started down. Like I said, I'll link all that in the description. Really appreciate that. Okay, guys, here's probably my favorite lure to fish. If not my favorite, my second favorite, or tied with my favorite. I mean, when it comes to fishing, it's like if you gave me the choice of a jerkbait or a jig, I have a hard time picking the two. But if you told me, okay, Randy, would you rather be on a really good jig bite or a really good jerkbait bite? I'd probably go with the jig, man. A jig is just so fun to fish, depending upon how you're fishing it, how the fish are biting it. It's just, there's not another lure that across the board produces more quality fish than a jig. Now, there's other lures like a big swim bait or a glide bait that may produce bigger fish, but you don't catch many fish on them. A jig is one of those lures that you get a combination of a lot of big fish on it and a lot of strikes. It's just a really good lure profile. Now, what I want to do in today's video is, like I said, there's so much we can talk about on jigs. I could do an 8-hour seminar on it and not cover everything, but I want to talk specifically about how to modify a jig and how I set it up, because with a modification, a jig modification the way that I do it, I feel that it's going to probably double the amount of strikes that you get, and also it's going to really help you land more of the bites that you get. Now, a lot of people wouldn't think it, but a jig is a lure, if it's not designed right, that you lose a lot of fish on, and that's why I worked really hard with Cumberland Pro Lures to design my Blaukat throwback jig here, guys. I'll explain to you why, the features on this. Also, guys, I'll link my throwback jig link in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description if you guys would like to pick up one. Because, guys, I've used jigs forever, and I've been through dozens of different brands of jigs, and I've lost a lot of fish on jigs, and I came to the determination of, I figured out why I was losing fish on jigs. So I had the chance to work with Cumberland Pro Lures to design a jig that you won't lose fish on, that comes through the cover really good, and gets a lot of bites. Now, the fundamental aspect of that, why you're not losing many fish on my jig here, is it's got the short shank hook. It's got a 4/0 needlepoint mustad hook, and the shank on this thing is really, really important as far as having a short shank in correlation with the head design here. The head design and the fact that you have this turned eye is when you set the hook with this jig with the combination of those three elements, you don't hardly ever miss them. Guys, I've been fishing my throwback jig now for close to a year and a half since we built it and designed it. I have not lost one single bass that I've hooked on this jig, which is remarkable. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to at some point, but I have yet to lose one on it. I'm just super happy with it. And then, your weed guard needs to be uniform with that. Main thing with it, guys, another thing is the living rubber skirt. Most jigs today, in fact 90% of them are silicone, and silicone cannot compete with the live rubber, because the action that you get on a living rubber jig like this, on a hand-tied skirt, this is a hand-tied, a hand-tied skirt that actually allows the fibers to flare out more, and it just makes it look a lot more realistic in the water, and the living rubber puts out a glow that you can't duplicate with silicone. So that's just a few things there. So, okay, let's get into how to modify it. Now, the first thing that you want to do is when you're modifying a jig, a lot of it has to do with trimming the skirt on it. That's why on my jig here, I've purposely left the skirt long so you could do some modification. And depending upon the trailer that you use, it's going to have to be modified or cut back more or less, because sometimes you thread a trailer up on the hook here and sometimes you hang it off the end. But I want to show you how I set up my favorite jig setup. Now, first of all, you know, the jig, like I said, it's the Blaukat throwback jig, and the color variations, it just completely depends. We got tons of different colors, just, you know, really just depends on the water clarity. But let me specifically show you the trailer, how I mix and match it up here, my favorite. Now, the trailer that I prefer on jigs by far is this Zoom Big Salty chunk. It's like an old school chunk here. And a lot of the new age of anglers, a lot of them use those curly tail jig trailers, like the Rage Craws and the little flapping tails. And I do too occasionally, but guys, I'm a fan of the old style pork facsimile. I just think there's something about the profile of this lure and the way that it makes the jig fall. I get a lot of big fish to bite the thing. Now, the first thing I'm going to do on this thing is I'm going to cut, see the thing right there? I'm going to trim this back to make it where it's real thin, so where the hook goes into it, right here, I don't have much plastic. Now, this is one of those things about modifications that's going to get you more bites and not lose it, because when you cut that back like that, it gives it more freedom of movement to slide, and also there's less plastic in the way of the hook. So this is a really big modification to make on that. And also sometimes I'll sort of trim up the trailer a little bit. I'll make it a little bit more rounded off, make it a little bit more uniform, you know, just sort of play around with it, something that looks good on it. But that big salty chunk is my trailer choice. So the next thing I'm going to do, now this is simple, you just need a pair of sharp pliers, is I'm going to trim the skirt back. Now, the thing that you do not want to do on a jig is you don't ever just want to cut it straight across level. You want to come in and pick out strands and leave some long and leave some short. You want it sort of crazy looking. You want to make some really short that like sticks out all gnarly like that. And you want a little bit of the trailer covered, but you want to make sure that the trailer is very visible on the jig. So based upon how far your trailer's hanging down, it depends on how much you're going to cut off the skirt. But the main thing is when you're trimming it, make it really irregular, and don't ever make it uniform, because by making it irregular, it's just a lot more appealing to the fish. Now, look at that right there. That is a good looking jig setup. Very attractive to the fish. Now, that's a pretty simple modification. That's how I modify most all of my jigs right there. But that's just one thing I wanted to share with you guys. Another thing with that is, you know, like I said, we'll do a lot more jig videos in the future. But another tip that I'll give you on fishing jigs is you don't, unless you're fishing like a football head jig or something like that, you don't want to really drag a flipping and pitching jig or make short hops with it or pull it. I catch a lot more fish on a pitching and flipping jig, or even a casting jig, is if I let it hit the bottom and then I sort of pop it up pretty hard off the bottom like that, where it goes off maybe a foot up. In other words, I don't just like hop it along the bottom like that. You can catch them on it, but it seems like when you pop it up off the bottom like that, that it really triggers those bigger fish to hit. Because you got to imagine if this jig's on the bottom like that and it's sitting there, these fish think it's a crawdad, so they're down there and they're nosing up on it like that, and they're looking at it and they're studying it. And all of a sudden, if that jig snaps away from them like that, a lot of times they'll just dart up and get it out of a reaction strike. So that's a really good tip to remember there. But anyway, guys, just a short little video how to modify your jigs there. We'll do a lot more on them in the future videos, and hope it helps you guys catch a few good ones. So we'll talk later.